Okay, real talk for a minute. It's 10:19 p.m. I have roommates, I have neighbors, and I'm totally being that guy that everyone hates because they decide to do a very obnoxiously loud commentary at 10 at night. What is your exact location, and also can I know your debit card information? This should put you pretty close to where I am. From Lemmy, how much do you love your online friends? Real question, what do you want to do in the future? What are your plans? Do you want to be a mangaka, make videos, sell prints, freelance, work for a company? What are your aspirations? My main one at the moment is to get through school. Like you guys might have seen in one of my updates, I started going to college. It's for art, which a lot of people have mixed feelings about. Not that I feel like I need it, but I felt like I kind of owe it to myself to have a degree in something. So that's my main focus. As far as what I want to do with my plans, just what I'm doing at the moment is like making videos, making manga, streaming on Twitch. I know that that might not sound like the craziest, most elegant thing in the world at the moment, but it's what I got so far. I like having a simple life, and I don't know, it just makes things easier when it's simple, and if I can get it to work, that's great. What do you have for breakfast? What's breakfast? I feel really bad about it, but I do actually skip breakfast relatively often. But I always have a huge lunch, and I guess water. I have water for breakfast. If you focus really hard and are incredibly hydrated, can you draw with your mind? You can actually create abstract art by just throwing a water bottle into a pool. The ripples are art, right? Modern art. Also, in all the versions of Crow that you've ever created, how many limbs and body parts and pieces of her mind and soul has she collectively lost? Well, I guess we can start from head to toe. She's lost both eyes, ponytail, broken a shoulder, lost both arms, paralyzed her arms as well, lost her fingers, kidneys, spleen, adrenal glands, knees, bone marrow, legs, feet, white blood cells. Next question from Frogwife. What were your main influences for your manga? A lot of influence from my stories comes from, like, supernatural, because I just enjoy things that are supernatural and, like, just a little off. I would say Slender is a big part of it, just because my stories have to do, like, with supernatural monsters that people try to kill. So Slender is definitely a big part of it. My nightmares, which is always fun. And I just enjoy that premise. It's like you versus your own nightmares, and it's literally your wits that will change the outcome. I think that that's a very fun idea to play around with. How to be super detailed and how to make awesome action scenes. If you want the action scene to be awesome, it needs to make sense. You know, you get kind of taken out of it if you don't know what's going on. So the short answer to that is planning. A good fight is always well planned, just because it's possible, it's doable, it's relatively believable, and I think that that doesn't happen by accident. You can't just throw every cool pose that's in your head out onto a piece of paper and expect it to make sense to other people. So I would say just really planning it would be the best thing that you could do. How are you so comfortable on camera and with your voiceovers? I love the personality you inject into your videos, and I really admire your attitude. Oh, thank you. Well, the first piece of advice I have is to not be recording commentary at 10:30 at freaking nighttime. It is a skill that you develop. Everyone acts differently on camera to a degree, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you get at being yourself. The best way to describe it is you are yourself off of camera, and when you are on camera, you're still trying to be yourself, but there's like that weird easing into it because it's something different. And the moment you learn how to do that, it's literally just, you know, being yourself. If you're dumb and weird like me, then you use that. And if you're actually smart, then you use that. You just use what you have. What is your favorite fruit or vegetable? My favorite fruit is mangoes. My favorite vegetable is potatoes, because potatoes are cool. How did you start with YouTube? And what made you think to do so? There is a guy that I used to watch all the time. His username used to be Chamoth143. It's Benedict Chamoth now. He left YouTube 4 years ago, so like relatively close to the time I started, he stopped. But I used to see a lot of his speed paints, and the dude's art style just blew my freaking mind. Like, one, I didn't know about Sai. I didn't know drawing anime to that caliber was possible. But every time I saw one of this dude's videos, I was like, whoa, what the heck? Like, that's possible? And I would say, actually, looking at it now, a lot of my art style was definitely influenced by him. That's interesting. Yeah, because people always ask like where my art style comes from, and it's like, well, it's not anime because I never watch anime. But now that I look at it, I think their art style had a big part to play. So I always saw this dude's speed paints from when I was 12 to 15. I learned about tablets, and I wanted to make my own YouTube channel because I was like, oh, hey, like I can do what they're doing. Not to the same degree, but I could make speed paints. So I started, and I had no idea how, but I did it, and it worked. So Benedict Chamoth, really cool dude. How long does it take to draw and ink a manga page? It depends on how ambitious it is, but I usually find that I can sketch the entire thing in a single day and then ink it in 1 to 2 days. So a manga page on average will usually take 2 to 3 days for me. When you finish your manga, will you go to a publisher or self-publish? I mean, I think I'm going to go with self-publishing because I don't know of any publishers. If you do know any, please let me know. And as well as is this a job, a hobby, or an in-between? I'm kind of at an in-between. I want it to be a job, but I treat it more seriously than a hobby. So, I don't know. I guess the honest age-old question of art is that you do want to do it as a living, right? So I'm working towards it, but I'm not quite there yet. Who are your favorite artists? Well, I mentioned Chamoth143. He's a really cool dude. I like the guy who drew Death Note, Mark Crilly, just a lot of the classics. Draw with Jazza. Yeah, so just a lot of the fairly common ones. What about your art do you want to improve most? Anatomy. Definitely anatomy. You always think you have it figured out. You do not, because the human body is just freaking confusing. Is your art style inspired by someone? You know, I didn't actually figure it out until I was talking about it in this video, but I think Chamoth143 had a lot to do with it. Which is interesting, because I didn't ever think about that before. So, him, Mark Crilly, just like the general artist stuff. It's kind of inspired by everything rather than everyone. I don't know if that makes sense, but even with perspective, I'll look at things and figure out how to draw them in my own style. I'll take things I like from realism and incorporate them. I'll take things I like from speed paints, TV shows, even like realistic TV shows and movies and stuff. I kind of draw from all sources rather than just from people to figure out what I want my drawing to look like. And it does change from drawing to drawing too. Like it's not as straightforward. What or who made you want to start art and pursue it? What is your process of making OCs? What gave you the idea of your manga's inverse catalyst and Hill Surrounded? So the person that made me want to start and pursue art is my dad. I remember when I was 3, I asked him to draw something from like a Hulk comic book for me. And I actually sat down and watched. I had never seen anyone draw before, but it blew my freaking mind. It was like watching magic happen. And 3-year-old me was just like, whoa, this man's a wizard. Wow! And then he needed to stop, so he just gave me the pencil and told me to finish it. Absolutely ruined that drawing, by the way, but, you know, he's my dad. And I'm 3. He's not going to tell me that. As far as my process for making OCs, and I guess manga as well, I always start with a basic word or idea. So if a word connotes to a symbol or a meaning, I will structure something around that. Just to use an example of 3 characters from Inverse Catalyst, because that's a very good example. Crow. When I think crow, what do I think of? I think of a bird of prey, a bird that looks semi-elegant, and it's obviously something that can be a formidable kind of bird. It's higher up in like the birds you wouldn't want to mess with. I mean, sure, it's not a freaking eagle, but it's not a tiny canary. So when I thought of that, I thought to myself, if it's a bird of elegance, what would clothing of elegance look like? A kimono. What would I want their hairstyle to be like? Because the bird has short frayed feathers around its neck, I figured about neck length hair. So just little by little, I got the pieces together. Red and black seemed to work well, and I wanted an accent, so I added a ribbon in her hair, and it kind of just got pieced together like that. With Exodus, it is a reference to a book of scripture, so I made the character have an angelic design. With Akumu, that's Japanese for nightmare, or Akumu, I don't know how you say words. It means nightmare, so I developed a character that was very nightmare-esque, and so they all kind of follow a pattern. Everyone has a symbol, and I build around that symbol, and even down to their personalities. So that's what I did with that. And then as far as my mangas, I like what-if questions, and I like hypothetical situations, and I always think of those when I'm developing worlds, because I'll develop a world first, and then I'll build the characters that I need for the world to function. So in the case of Inverse Catalyst, I thought to myself, what would happen if there was a monster that could take someone's appearance and try to kill them to replace them as the original? And who could fight something like that? How would they fight it? When I ask myself those kinds of questions and I decide to answer them, I started building a story. With Hill Surrounded, my questions were, what would happen if there was a detective that was so good that they could solve any case, but their own self-confidence was what was holding them back? So it's someone that's so good at everything and they know it, but the fact that they're not confident in themselves is their greatest weakness. So I built a story based around Neffy, who needs to gain her confidence back because she's good enough. She just needs to believe she is. And I built a case worthy of her skill level, and also something that would provide room for her to grow. So that started with what if questions. And I don't know, I just always like asking them. Always like hypotheticals. There's like 100 different story ideas I come up with all the time just from hypothetical questions. And it's just fun to think about, because when you take time to answer them, you usually do come up with something good. Suppose it's been a while since you started drawing your comic. How would you keep yourself motivated when the comic may be feeling a bit of downer at the moment? I struggled with that when I first drew my comic. I was motivated and did somewhat regular updates to it, but then I just stopped and wasn't motivated anymore. Well, that is kind of an important line to cross, because I learned this especially on YouTube. There's a lot of imaginary expectations that people put on themselves. I guess I can list a few of mine, like, oh, you need to upload a video every week. It needs to be like a full, polished, finished speed paint. Or if I want to try anything new, I'm like, no, I can't do that. I need to stick to what I've been doing. And a lot of times people tend to put imaginary limitations on themselves. And the thing that's unfair about that is you're kind of the only one that holds yourself to them. No one even expects you to. So I would say, like, if it's a downer at the moment, try something else, because if you give yourself a little bit of breathing room from what you're working on, you could actually find something else, or you could pick up a missing piece that will make you want to go back, and then you'll have one more thing than you did before. A good example of that, I guess, for me is with Inverse Catalyst. I made that one shot and I stopped there because I knew I wanted my art skills and my comic making skills to be a little higher before I went back to the project. So I did something else. I built an alternate story for Hill Surrounded. At first it was a backup idea. Now I like it almost as much, if not a little more, than my original manga. But now that I have that and I have that kind of insight, I can kind of pick between the two. So rather than having one basket that I'm putting all of my eggs in, I have a few. And there's nothing wrong with taking a break if you need it. Don't hold yourself to an impossibly high standard. They're not fun to keep. What do you keep in mind while creating the visual part of the character? How vague do you keep the idea at the start? So it's kind of like I mentioned with my characters before. I revolve it around a word, and then around that word I build thematically. And I just start asking myself questions, like I said with Crow. If a person was named Crow, what kind of design would they have? What kind of personality would they hold? What would they look like? What kind of elements would I want to incorporate into their design that would be like a bird? So I start around a word or a symbol, which is a relatively vague idea, and then I kind of just build from there with questions. And you know it's a good question if it gets you to answer it in a very specific way. So you just need to ask yourself the right kinds of questions and the stories will write themselves. What is your favorite manga / anime? My favorite manga is Death Note. That thing looks freaking great. It just looks nice. The backgrounds are solid. The story is just as solid. It's freaking cool. How far have you planned the plot right now for Hill Surrounded, now that you've started illustrating it? So the way I do my planning is based around events rather than chronological order. So I've planned the first chapter. I know the ending. I know a couple of different options for the ending. I also know things that absolutely need to happen in the story. So I plan out the major events and then I kind of just fill in the in-between as I'm going along. So let's say I know point A, B, C, and D. I know that those 4 things need to happen, but I figure out A first, and then as I'm working towards B, maybe I could write something in between A and B. I don't know if that makes sense. But I have all the important events figured out. Now I just kind of need to lay them in order to say like, oh, this goes here, this goes here. But I do have the foundation of the story built. Which art supply would you like to work with but haven't yet? I really want to work with acrylic and learn how to use that. Oil painting as well. I think just painting in general. Because like I'm practicing a painterly style in digital and I want to learn how to do that traditionally as well. It's definitely something that adds a lot to the table. And it's nice to not need to add 30 layers of red in watercolors just to have a solid red. It's not fun, man. What was your reason for giving Akumu a watermelon costume? I need to know. Intimidation. What's your favorite anime / manga other than yours? I'm really bad because I don't actually watch a lot of anime. But like I said, Death Note, and if I had to pick a second, maybe Beyond the Boundary. Anyway, that's what I have for the questions. I hope they were insightful. I hope that they were helpful. And like I mentioned a lot before about manga making, I do actually have 2 mangas that you guys can go and check out for free. They're on Webtoons. I'll just link them into the description. And if you also want to support Hill Surrounded and get updates before anyone else as it's being made, I can also link my Patreon. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. I might do a part 2 to this later on, so if you guys have more questions in regards to just whatever, please do feel free to leave them in the comments and I will get to them. Anyway, please let me know what you guys thought of the video. It was super fun to make and it was fun to answer all of these questions. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and I will see you in the next one. Bye!